Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today, How to Empower Engineering Teams to Improve at Scale. We're going to be joined today by Matthew Skelton of Conflux and Benedict Steele of Armakuni. My name is Jackie Patton and I'm going to be your host for today. The chat is open. If you want to introduce yourself, you should see that at the bottom of your screen. So head down there, let us know who you are, where you're joining from so that we can see who's joining us today. You'll also notice that throughout the webinar today, we're going to have the Q&A open. So please do make use of having Benedict and Matthew with us today. Ask as many questions as you want. And at the end of the session, we will be running a Q&A and we're going to try and get all of those answered for you. I can see some people here telling us where they're joining from. Hi, Anna. Thanks for joining. So today, Matthew and Ben are going to be discussing all things multi-team delivery, software delivery assessment, MSDA. So we're going to be talking about how this can be used to assess and empower engineering teams in fast-paced businesses. I'm very excited to hear everything these guys have to say. I know it's going to be a wonderful session and a really great opportunity for you to ask all your questions as well. They're going to be discussing how you can find and also emphasize the best practices in your teams, and also how you can assess these practices across tens or hundreds of teams on a regular basis. So as I mentioned, please make sure that you drop all of your questions in the Q&A throughout the session. I'll be back in about half an hour to pose those questions to Matthew and Ben. But for now, I'm going to hand over to the gentlemen so we can get started. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jackie. Make sure we've all got our mics unmuted so you can hear us saying some good words. So let me introduce myself. My name is Benedict Steele. I am going to learn how to use a slide. I'm the Chief Delivery Officer at Armakuni. It may not look like it, but I have 20 years experience in technology, product and engineering. But this is not about how great I look. This is about us. And so Matthew, would like to say hello and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, it's good to be here. My name is Matthew Skelton. I'm the founder at Conflux, and I'm the co-author of the book Team Topologies. So today we are going to look at this. We're going to try and think about how we empower engineering teams to improve at scale. And this is the summary, basically. So if you feel like you need to head off and do some other things, or you've got something distracting you, or you like to take a little nap, that's all fine. Here is basically the summary of what we're talking about today. So we recommend that you use the multi-team software delivery assessment, otherwise known as MSDA, and to accelerate the adoption of this kind of approach, we think it's actually useful to use a partner like Armakuni or Conflux that understands the MSDA, understands the intent behind it, and can help you to make the adoption of this approach more effective. Now, the context for all this is really these two books and similar books that have come out over the last 10 years or so. The book on the left, Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble and Dave Farley, really an absolutely foundational book. Continuous Delivery is, as it says there as a subtitle, reliable software releases through build, test and deployment automation. This is the foundation of effective software delivery at scale in any kind of organization. These techniques have been proven out over the last 12 years. And really any organization that's serious about kind of sustainable software delivery or delivery of services that involve a software component or software aspect need to be using continuous delivery practices. I think that's been borne out. But it's not just about the technical practices. We need to think about how the kind of teams interact at scale inside an organization. And that's where this book, Team Topologies, comes in. So I'm the co-author along with Manuel Paish. Team Topologies book was published in 2019 and covers the kind of dynamics, the kind of organizational dynamics around building and running software enriched services. In fact, it's not just for that, it's actually for outside of IT as well, but it certainly covers all of the areas of IT that exist in typical organizations today. And the context for both of these books and similar books is really fast flow. We're doing things incredibly quickly now. Go back 10, 15, 20 years, an IT software project was taking, months or years from inception through to completion. Now we're talking about approaches which require continuous evolution of existing software services, and doing that continuous evolution with multiple fast flows of change across the organization. And that requires a very different kind of set of approaches and assumptions and ways of working. And so it's this context, fast flow effectively, that we're thinking about today when we're trying to think about how we empower teams to improve at scale. And one of the first things we're going to have to expect in this fast flow context is that we're going to see different practices and techniques across different teams and even different streams across the organization. And that's not a problem. We should not be expecting to have uniformity across all of these. The different approaches actually act as a way for the organization to sense different opportunities. Different techniques that work in different places. We have to be sensing multiple different approaches at the same time, trying these out, because we're moving at such a pace that we can't expect to just use a single technique and that a single technique is sufficient. We need to be continuously trying different techniques all the time. But here's a question: how do teams know what good looks like? If they're working on different things and there's many hundreds of teams across the organization, what are we doing to help teams understand what a good set of practices or effective set of practices looks like, either for their context or in general? So we need something in place that helps to kind of spread that awareness as well. We need to have a technique or an approach which then starts to look at the techniques that teams are using across many tens or even hundreds of teams across the organization. Because this is the world that we're working in now. Many organizations have many tens or hundreds of teams. And the approach that we need to find is something that works at that scale. It probably also works at a smaller scale too, that's fine. But we can't just take a technique which works with, say, 10 or 15 teams and expect that to work with an organization that has hundreds of different teams working in different areas. We need something that does work at scale. And we need something that works on a regular basis. We need an approach that is not too challenging, not too difficult, doesn't take too much time. There's not too much of a drag on the kind of productivity of teams and so on. Because if we're going to improve continuously, we need to have regular checkpoints that help teams reflect back on what they were doing before and help them look forward for the next period of time on which we're going to kind of look at their approaches and help them reflect. So we need an approach which works on a regular basis too. Ultimately, the way in which we do this kind of assessment or this observation and reflection on team skills and practices should help to empower these teams to improve. The kind of approach we take should not be something which disempowers a team. It should actively empower the team to help them make better decisions and improve the ways that they work. And that's what we believe you can find in the Multi-Team Software Delivery Assessment, MSDA.
And what is the MSDA? Well, it's a holistic exploration of the team, and it covers not just the people, not just the process, not just the tooling. It looks at all three at once, because we often find that you would go into an organization and they say, well, it's okay once we've adopted Jira or we've installed Git or we're following Scrum or we hire different people, we're going to be better. And it's always the three things working in unison that really work. So what goes into the MSDA is these dimensions of team health, the flow of work through the team, how the software is deployed, how it's operated when it's out the door and into production, how is quality measured, the testability and testing of the software, are the continuous delivery approaches being followed, is what's the reliability of the software, and are there any SRE practices? If the software is being supported on call, how do the team feel about that? Are they able to articulate and get across what what's needed and what's in place for on-call. And foundational things like security, and like a newish dimension is that of looking at the team from a team topologies lens as well. And what it allows teams to do is it allows them to discover where are the blockers in our delivery, what are the things that are holding us back. It also allows teams to establish metrics to improve upon, so they can find their current condition, their baseline condition, and put effort and energy and improve from there. And it also it accelerates the change initiatives that organizations often always have going on. It leads to engaged teams. Teams feel like they've been heard. They are able to articulate and express what they're experiencing in their day-to-day. It provides a clear position to say this is where a team is, but also from a leadership perspective, it provides a cross organizational look at the team. So it allows you to spot patterns, allows you to reveal any blind spots that may be occurring. And ultimately, it leaves the whole organization energized, saying we know where we are today and we know what we need to do next to accelerate and move on. The whole of the MSDA is at its core Creative Commons licensed, so you can visit this URL and softwaredeliverassessment.com and have a look at it for yourself. You can try it out on your teams, and if you want to improve it and enhance it, you can absolutely give back and commit back to the community. So we've said some words, but where have we actually tried this out? So between Conflux and Armakuni, we've deployed it at over 200 teams. We've done it across many different organizations, multiple verticals: finance, media, charity, health, government. We've not really come across a type of organization where it doesn't work. I'm not sure whether you've got the same experience, Matthew.
I think it's. I'm inclined to agree. Like we've yet to find a context where the MSDA is not helpful. And my feeling is that any organization that is building and running kind of software enriched services at any kind of interesting scale is going to benefit from this approach, and does benefit from this approach. That's what we're seeing.
We've run it across organizations of all sizes. So we have been into organizations where they have one or two teams and used it there, and also scale ups and long-lived institutions as well. And also we've used it across teams that are dealing with data, AI, ML, configure off-the-shelf software, infrastructure, app development, mobile apps. Not really come across many teams where it doesn't apply to their context.
And I think it just struck me that that's partly because the way in which the assessment runs is that teams can choose to say that a particular question is just not relevant in their context, and crucially talk it through why it's not relevant, and then they gain the confidence that they know they don't need to answer that question because it doesn't relate to them, and that's fine. And we'll dive into how that is an important part of the assessment a little bit later on.
Great.
So the origins of the multi-team software delivery assessment came from work I was doing in the UK government back in 2018. So from the majority of 2018, I was engineering lead in a large UK government department. We had more than 700 people in total, 70 engineering teams across 7 different physical locations. And the systems we were building at the time were very time critical. We were chiefly involved in building systems or evolving existing systems that were related to Brexit, so the departure of the UK from the European Union. And so there's lots of things to build, and they had to be ready for a particular date. There was absolutely no way that they couldn't be ready. And so it was really important that we could share good practices, or discover existing good practices and share these across these different teams, because there are many different suppliers involved, and so we had to find ways of identifying good practice, sharing this across other parts of the organization, so that we can improve very rapidly at scale. Now, of course, what I realised whilst I was doing this is that this approach is actually kind of a general approach. This is the general problem. Multiple different kind of groups of people with more or less overlap depending on their context and drivers and things like this, and a greater or lesser awareness of good practices. This is a general case. Effectively, it just became very important to do well at scale in this particular context because of the time critical nature of what we were doing. So back then in 2018, we had 6 dimensions. The first 6 there that Benedict mentioned: team health, deployment, continuous delivery, flow, operability, and testing. We've since added 4 additional dimensions. And crucially, we actually used what we called a viral facilitation model. So in a given session with one team, the facilitator would invite an additional facilitator or 2. Those facilitators would then understand how to facilitate that session. They could then go and facilitate further sessions themselves and invite further facilitators. So you rapidly get a kind of exponential explosion of the number of facilitators able to run these sessions. And so then very quickly you're able to cover a very large number of teams. Crucially, the criteria we're using in this assessment are taken from existing sources. There's existing Spotify team health check that's been around, I think, since 2012, something like that. Books like DevOps for the Modern Enterprise, Continuous Delivery, the one I mentioned earlier, the book Accelerate, from which we get the DORA metrics. So there's a question in the chat from Giles. How does MSDA differ from DORA metrics? We'll have a little look in it a little bit later. But the MSDA is kind of has many more dimensions than the DORA metrics. The DORA metrics are a really good place to start, but MSDA looks at many different dimensions, not kind of purely sort of software delivery metrics around flow and uptime and things, and a few other different books as well. In other words, what we're doing is we're taking existing accepted good practice, effective ways of doing things, that people have written about and spoken about and kind of been discussed at conferences and this kind of thing, and through research like the State of DevOps Reports research, and that have effectively become accepted good practice in the community. And we're picking out specific aspects of these and using these specific aspects as key things to look for, key things to discuss, key things to aim for as a team and as multiple teams to help us focus on continuous improvement. That's what we're doing here. So we haven't invented anything. We're drawing on what's already there in the community and what's already kind of accepted as good practice, but pulling it together and pulling specific ideas out of these existing books and reports and things as kind of useful indicators, useful things to focus on. That's what we're doing here. Back then in 2018, we actually used these very large printed sheets. So these are A1 size sheets that you can lay on a desk or table or put on the wall, and they're quite large. And took a team through the assessment. So all of the specific criteria are on that website that Benedict mentioned before. So you can go to softwaredeliverayassessment.com, find all the criteria. You won't see the criteria on here because that we show the criteria on a screen, and then people would discuss it, and then we'd fill in the team score on here. So you can see what they've done here is we're thinking about operability. That's the dimension that we're looking at. You can see that from the top of the page. And there's in this particular dimension, we're looking at 14 different aspects of that. This team has rated themselves number 3 on collaboration, somewhere in the middle. It's between 3 and 5 is the scoring that we're using. So they're somewhere in the middle. They're okay. They, for example, rated themselves a 4 on configuration deployment. They think that they're not very good at all on logging. So look at that. The criteria is 7, logging, working. They're giving themselves a 1. So the detail doesn't matter here, but the key thing is the team is discussing amongst themselves based on the criteria that are available on the website. They're discussing how well are we doing on this. Let's be realistic. Let's think about where we need to improve as a team and rate ourselves on that basis. You can also see there that there's actually 2 of these questions where they don't think they're relevant. They've put not applicable N/A. And then of course over time we can come back and do this again and they'll be able to see a trend. They'll be able to see some actions that they've taken or some additional things that they want to record under notes. Another printout here, the kind of end-to-end dimension. And again, there's some interesting discussion. You can see one particular team is not sure whether to rate themselves as 4 or 2 on innovation. There's clearly something to discuss there. Maybe the team's working on 2 separate things. Maybe there's 2 different perspectives on innovation. On innovation. The key thing here is it provides a really valuable way for the team to think about what they need to do to improve. You can actually get these printed sheets from the website, again, softwaredeliveryassessment.com. You're able to download the PDFs if you want to use it in this format. As we'll see in a little bit, Benedict will talk about some additional ways that Armakuni have been using the MSDA questions and approach. What we found when we've run this is that people valued the assessment very highly. You can see there on the left-hand post-it note in green, people are pretty happy, almost universally happy with the value they were getting from these sessions. And the way in which the sessions were executed as well, the facilitation worked well for them too. So they were happy that the use of their time, it was a valuable use of their time in this kind of 2-hour session that we had with each team.
Thank you. So in 2020, just before the UK locked down, we were working with a media company, and we were in helping them migrate software from essentially A to B, from old systems to new systems, and this was the 2nd or 3rd team that had been working within this media company, and what we were spotting was there was a pattern in every team that we were working in, insofar that the software we were dealing with was deemed by the organization to be legacy, that it was critical to the business itself. You know, it was either helping them publish content or earn revenue or something like that. And there was also another project in that team, next to that team, adjacent to that team, who would be the one that were refactoring or reworking or rebuilding it in the latest and greatest technology. You know, we were using Go or Rust or something exciting. And what we said to the company was, well, how do you know that the software that we're dealing with today isn't that future of your new software? How are you going to continuously measure and continuously keep up to date with what's going on? We'd been using the MSDA previously in a couple of smaller organizations, and we said, well, let's try it out here to help you understand and look across your engineering function. There were more than 35 engineering teams, 7 departments. They were distributed across the world. Each team was responsible for multiple applications, so kind of over 250 applications, and the mix of technology was vast. And each team was kind of struggling with like architectural layers of, well, once upon a time we were going to build our own CI server, and then we were going to just use open source, and now we're using SaaS. So there's all this kind of these decisions that were being made. So at the point they said, yeah, let's do it, was the point that the UK went pretty much online as far as work was concerned. So we weren't able to take the paper-based approach that Matthew described. What we did do was we started off by just running Zoom calls where we would ask people to just, like, for each dimension, rate, you know, thumbs up, thumbs to the side, or thumbs down as far as the software is concerned. And that worked okay. That was fine. But what we were noticing was some people were leading, like we would maybe wait for their manager or wait for a more senior person to vote, and then everybody go, yeah, it's great, or it's not, it's bad. So we weren't getting kind of a clear picture, and the discussions around the dimensions weren't great. So we then moved to Mentimeter, like an online kind of real-time survey tool, to ask in the moment, is that you know, how is it working? And the feedback, again, it was fine, but the feedback from the teams was, you're just kind of surveying us en masse rather than actually facilitating discussion around it. It's hard to focus on filling in the survey and then having discussion. So what we ended up eventually doing was actually asking all the questions up front that are in the MSDA. So people would just fill out a survey first, and then we'd run a workshop with them to discuss the dimensions. And what we're looking for when we're discussing the dimensions are, who not not the dimensions that maybe are all high or all low, but where are the delta, where's the gap? The innovation example, if somebody's rated it 1 and somebody's rated it 5, why are you doing that? What's not right about it? But it also started to feed into this more interactive way of looking at a team. So you're looking at who are your stakeholders, and how's your process, and talk about your process in relation to the answers you've given in the MSDA. And it allows us to reveal these things that are often not reported. They're not articulated. Things like having to relearn things, or having to deal with overly complicated solutions, or unnecessary processes. All this stuff that the teams just seem to suffer from, we were able to start to kind of expose and bring to the surface. The other thing that we were able to do by asking the survey up front was be able to spot those patterns across the teams. So it's very important that you don't compare team A with team B with team C, because their context is different, their pressure is different, everything about them is different. You shouldn't ever be comparing teams. But what you should be looking for is patterns across the teams. So if you look at this example, if you can see here, there's a problem in this organization with their test first approach to code and features. You can see that teams are reporting that they're struggling with that. So there may be something there in that the organization has as a problem. Maybe it's a knowledge deficit, maybe it's too much time spent on building features rather than building quality, and those sorts of things. The other thing we've started doing is augmenting the MSDA with other things. So the mention about the DORA, we take the DORA 4 key metrics, and we ask teams about how do you apply yourselves to those things. We take things like stakeholder mapping, we look at psychological safety, the employee advocacy, and the Western organizational culture. How much of a generative organization are you? You can augment the MSDA with whatever you need to help to make it richer and more beneficial. The other thing we were finding was that in some teams, they weren't actually aware of what good practice or best practice is. And so we were actually enlightening them. We were moving them from that kind of stage of unconscious incompetence, we don't know what we don't know, to, oh, now we know what we don't know, and we now need to start to learn and improve and build upon that. The feedback we were given by the director of the group that we were working with was that it helps give us this evidence to present to the board to help to drive change. They've given us a clear, measurable action that we can communicate throughout the whole organization. I think an anecdotal thing was that they said, you've helped reveal blind spots we didn't even know existed, which is that's blind spots, right? But they helped to uncover things that we just didn't know were there. As far as the viral facilitation is concerned, what we started doing was we started actually breaking up the approach to running MSDA and providing like a bingo card for people to follow and track, because seeing one, doing one, teaching one as an approach is fine, but it's actually sometimes more complex and more involved. So this is the way that we allow people to say, right, if you're going to start to learn how to deliver MSDA or how to facilitate MSDA, these are all of the attributes you need to know. Take it on, do it, and make it happen. And I'm not saying that running MSDA can make you rich, but we have had some anecdotal feedback that people have taken on, and this is not the media company, but another organization we worked with recently, have taken on some of the suggestions and the recommendations that we've made with MSDA, and they've implemented them. And that meant they've hit their targets and they've been paid the bonuses that they really love being paid. And, so I'm just saying, maybe if you do this, you might become richer.
So we thought we'd share what we think are some success patterns for specifically for the MSDA. But to be honest, these success patterns here are really patterns for doing any kind of comparison or assessment of teams at scale. To be honest, some of it is specific to this particular tool, but a lot of this is actually general advice, really, when we're trying to make sure that we retain a generative culture, and we retain a generative culture and maintain or improve psychological safety. That's what we're trying to do, because we know that those things are now essential for effective software delivery at scale. And the first thing is this: when you're running an assessment like this, the aim is, primary aim is to help teams gain a shared understanding and shared mental models. One of the most difficult things to deal with, actually, inside organizations is where you've got mental models which are radically different and which are pulling against alignment, and which are effectively got people's mental models effectively pulling against each other. And so people are making assumptions which are just not compatible effectively. So by using the assessment like this, a key part of what we're trying to do is actually to help build some alignment around shared mental models.
Another thing that's important, and I mentioned it previously, but I want to kind of reiterate it, is you should look for the deltas, explore the difference between those high and low scores. Is it because they don't have a shared mental model? Is it because their expectation of what good looks like in this particular dimension differs? Those are the things that are really important to try and explore and try and get the teams to come to terms with.
What we're trying to do is to increase the kind of awareness of competence inside teams. So moving teams from what's called unconscious incompetence, in other words, they don't know that they're doing something badly or ineffectively. Move them from that to what's called conscious incompetence. They're now aware that they're doing something ineffectively, but go beyond that to the point where they're now kind of unconsciously competent. They're doing something effective, but they don't even have to think about it most of the time. So that's the kind of target we're aiming for here.
It's so important to make time for teams to improve. Like, there's no point in running an MSDA and then 6 months later coming back and running the same, but have expected the teams just to be delivering features through that whole 6-month period. So make time for improvements, make sure that they've got the ability to try stuff out, to experiment, to learn, and to continuously improve.
A really key thing here that we really strongly believe is never use an assessment like this, whether it's MSDA or whether it's something equivalent. Never use an assessment approach like this to make direct comparisons between teams. That is going to drive distrust. It's going to reduce effectiveness, and it's not going to give you any useful outcomes in terms of delivery, in terms of code ownership, in terms of service quality, anything like that. What we're trying to do here instead is to empower the teams to improve themselves. Yes, we can make some general cross-team comparisons to spot where there might be a particular problem across a whole organization, like Benedict said before. Maybe most teams find it difficult to do test-first approach. Fine, let's focus on that. But we're not comparing team A to team B or team B to team F directly and doing some kind of punishment or other kind of detrimental action based on the specific results they get. Because if teams sense that they're going to be punished or downgraded for their responses, they're not going to give truthful responses, and we need truthful responses if we're going to improve at scale.
Absolutely. And when you're doing this, start small, work with 1 or 2 teams initially, work out what does and doesn't work for your organization. Don't try and do it en masse across 100 teams all at once. Start small and help them, that team, build improvements and show that they're making marked improvements, enhancements to themselves.
Remember, the purpose of this assessment in particular is team empowerment, not kind of judging different teams, not comparing these different teams. We're trying to empower the team, give the team the awareness of good practices so that they can take the decisions to improve themselves at that team level.
The viral facilitation model works best in a generative culture if people are bridging across teams and sharing and learning. If there's some aspect back to this judgment thing, if there's some aspect of judgment, or if you think that the facilitator will somehow mark people down or just use it against them, then it doesn't work. So it is possible in other cultures, but we recommend that just to work towards a generative culture to do the viral facilitation.
It's important as well to be aware of what you might call parroting. So just kind of repeating what someone else is saying. And this is particularly important for the facilitators that we use in the sessions. So we think that the facilitators of these sessions really, really need to understand the value of the specific practices that we're talking about in the assessment. In reality, that means that the facilitators do need to have some kind of engineering background, probably. Perhaps they're coming from testing, perhaps they're coming from data science, whatever, but they've got some awareness, some practical awareness of using these techniques in the real world to build software-enriched services. We're not just using a facilitator who is good at facilitating, but doesn't really understand the details of the practice. We need people to be able to articulate what it is about this specific question or what it is about this specific practice that makes it important for the team to think about in a given way. We don't just want to kind of facilitate to go in there kind of blindfolded, if you like, and just kind of reading off the criteria. The facilitator needs to be able to explain some of the important detail and nuance of the questions that are in each dimension.
And the facilitators need genuine curiosity. They can't be going into teams and saying, "You're not using test-driven development. Why not? Girl, you're rubbish." They need to be like, "Well, what is your context? Why have you not done that? What's led to where the team is today? What led to these behaviours?" They need to be open-minded and not like, again, not judgy, not coming across as better or more powerful than the teams themselves. If you want to try this out and you think, "I really, really want some physical artifacts," then you're in luck. Agile Stationery, agilestation.com have printed some cards. I have some here. You can see them. They do really exist. They're great. We will send you an email after this webinar with a lovely little discount code. So that's a reward for watching, for getting this far. You can get some money off. And just a reminder, if you want to try this out yourself, if you visit softwaredeliverayassessment.com, you can try the dimensions out for yourself and work with your teams. And if you remember right back to the very beginning, when Matthew said, if you want to have a little nap now, this is what we're going to be telling you. I'm just going to reiterate, this is what we told you, that to empower your engineering teams to improve at scale, you can use the MSDA, the Multi-Team Software Delivery Assessment. And we do recommend that you can accelerate the effective adoption via a partner like Conflux or Armakuni. And that's not to say you need us to do it for you all the time, forever and ever. It's to bring partners in to help you understand how to run it yourselves and eventually pass off and make it more sustainable for you. So there we are. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Before we jump into the questions, that if you'd like to see more from either company, head to armakuni.com and head to confluxhq.com. I'm looking forward to the questions now.
Yeah, we've got loads that have come in as well. Thank you so much, guys. That was such a great session. I can see everybody throwing questions in the chat and in the Q&A. So I'm going to start working through them now. First question was from Georgie, and she asks, how do you measure that teams are more engaged? She wants to know about that measurement.
That's a good question. So it's a really, really good question. It's not actually addressed directly by this assessment. You'd have to have a meta assessment on top of that to assess the engagement. We did have on one of the slides, it did say that teams are more engaged. This is based on what we see. We see that actually teams it gives them a lift if they've been inside one of these sessions. Based on my experience of facilitating these sessions, the vast majority of teams that we've worked with have felt empowered. They felt excited by this stuff, that they felt listened to. They felt more kind of keen to improve. So on that basis, this is what we see on a kind of on a customer by customer basis? It's a very good question. I'd love to know the answer to that one. How do you actually measure engagement? There are probably some standard engagement scores, engagement tools that we use perhaps from marketing or something that might be adaptable inside organizations. It's not my area of expertise, but it's a really nice question. Thanks, Georgie. I don't know if you've seen anything around that, Andy.
So we have sometimes measured teams around dimensions such as their awareness around software craft, their willingness, their knowledge, their skills, and their organizational support. So to asking those questions around that, and then measure them on the way in, and then on the way out, and then over time to track. Have they learned anything? Do they feel empowered? Do they think this is actually valuable?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks both. So I'm going to jump into another question that's come in here. So Apostolis has said, we've gone through a very similar exercise, created the dimensions, but the experience they've had so far is that it takes quite a long time to run it, more like a day rather than a few hours. The discussions are really interesting, so they don't want to limit those, but it does lead to longer sessions. So what would you suggest to hit a good balance between filling in the assessment responses versus facilitating useful discussion points?
It's a great question. Thanks, Apostolis. I think this points to the importance of really understanding what we're trying to get out here. Because if there's a need to have long discussions about things, then that's actually a useful organizational signal, right? If people want to discuss it, then there's a need, and let's try and address that need. But maybe there's a need to discuss things because this is the only opportunity we've had to discuss them. And so maybe maybe that points to a need to have more regular sessions to discuss aspects of team improvement or organizational improvement or something like this. It might actually be a signal that the more of that stuff is needed. And so that when you run the MSDA sessions, say every quarter or every 4 months or 6 months or something, when you run the sessions, perhaps they could be quicker because people have already had the chance to go through that kind of more important discussion. So look at it from a slightly different perspective. What is this telling us? What are these long discussion sessions telling you? It's probably there's a need there, but maybe there's a way to kind of address that need outside of these MSDA sessions to an extent. And so we can keep the MSDA sessions to perhaps 3 hours or 3.5 hours or something like that for each team, something like that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ben, do you want to add anything, or happy to move on?
No, I agree, but also there's a thing to bear in mind here, which is there's a lot of information in the MSDA, and so if what you don't want to do is come out with 100 things you need to improve. You want to be targeted on what you want to improve. So maybe you focus on a particular thing a quarter rather than actually everything all at once.
Great. Hopefully that's answered your question. I've got a question here from Jack, which I think is a really interesting one. I'd love to know what you both think. How do you deal with this situation where very senior management, in this case a CTO, just don't get it? So they're pushing for the team versus team or dev versus developer comparison. And he said they're also, or maybe a CEO kind of role.
I mean, if you've got a CTO or CEO who doesn't get it, then why are they in that role, to be honest? Because if in 2022 and beyond, you've got someone who doesn't understand about psychological safety, doesn't understand about the dangers of team-to-team comparison, they shouldn't be in that role. But if they are in that role, what can you do? What we did is the way in which you collect the data from this kind of assessment is important. And you can actually deliberately collect it in a way which is kind of anonymized. And certainly when you bring it together into, let's say, a spreadsheet or something like that, you can to an extent anonymize it. It's certainly anonymized at the team level anyway. You don't understand, there's no, you can arrange it so that there's no individual score associated with it, depending on how you collect the data. So the ways in which you collect that data, the ways in which you enable that data to be shared can help to point things in the right direction, help to open people's eyes to the value of focusing on team empowerment rather than team-to-team direct comparison.
Yeah, I mean, we've had to do that in the past. Is anonymize it at a team level when we report it back to senior managers, because we know the culture in that organisation is quite barbaric. But from the question, like, how do I persuade my CTO not to compare mean, invite us along for a cup of tea with them. We are more than happy to persuade them that they shouldn't be comparing people.
I mean, that's actually part of the reason why it could be useful to get in an organization like Armakuni or Conflux, is because we're able to bring an additional kind of outside perspective and have some of those conversations with a CTO or CEO. That can be one additional benefit of using an external partner, at least to start with, like Benedict said. Our aim with the MSDA, and part of the reason why it's there, if you go to softwaredeliveryassessment.com, it's Creative Commons. It's basically open source. You can use it straight off. And that's deliberate, because what we want to do is to empower you inside your organization to be self-sufficient in running this stuff and self-improving over time. So our involvement typically is towards the start of this approach, as we're trying to move towards that generative culture to increase psychological safety, to help improve the kind of capability of the organization to run these kind of assessments. And so bringing in an organization like Armakuni or Conflux in early on can sort of help with that sort of transformation aspect as things are bedding in.
That follows on really nicely, actually. Somebody has anonymously asked us in the questions, is this easy to do myself?
I think it depends.
It depends. That's a consultant answer, right?
On where you are in the organization. It's easy for you to do at your own team level, but it depends on the characters in your team and who's around that team to do it. So yes, you can run the session and ask the questions and get the feedback on your team. If you're doing it across a team of teams, depends on who you are. Yes, again, it's possible to do it. But I would make sure that you're comfortable with all the questions in the MSDA. You know the reason why they're being asked and what the value of improving those things are. Because if you're not, that you can sometimes lose stock by doing it.
Yeah, I mean, technically it's fairly straightforward to execute it. The difficulties we found were in exactly that. We're in finding facilitators who really understood enough of the domain knowledge and concepts to be able to articulate that well to the teams. So, for example, there's a related question on here in the chat. Something about inter-team dependencies from an anonymous attendee. So that could literally be, so someone's asking on the softwaredeliveryassessment.com website, then there's lots of details, blah, blah, blah. And in the team topologies assessment dimension, there's a question about inter-team dependencies. Fine. In an actual team assessment session, someone in the team is going to ask that question. Hey, what do we mean here by inter-team dependencies? The facilitator needs to be able to answer that question, needs to be able to expand the detail out from the question in the open source question collection and articulate what we mean by that. And so that's where this assessment, it has to get more, it has to become sort of a bit more involved, because these concepts are involved and need someone who can unpack the detail a bit.
So I'm just conscious that we're coming up to 2:47. We're going to wrap up at 2:45, and I know that everyone on the call will be having loads of busy things going on in their day today. So I'm going to ask one more question, but I know that both Benedict and Matthew have said they'd be happy to answer the rest of the questions, and we'll make sure that those answers are sent out to you. So anyone that's asked a question anonymously, if you do want a response to that question, please pop it in the Q&A. We'll be able to see it, but nobody else on the call will. So if you'd like to do that, we can make sure that question's answered for you. So just while we're answering this final question, now would be a good time to do that. A couple of people have been asking around kind of how widely the results are communicated, or who has access to the results, or this idea, somebody said here, it can be quite hard kind of if your team's not in a good place to have those results communicated. So do you have any tips for handling that kind of communication of the results, or a little bit more info on how that's managed?
I think there's two things there. One is the team itself that's had the assessment, that's been involved in that assessment, should always get to see its own results so they can track them over time. So they can talk about it internally, and they can plan what they're going to do before the next assessment. So that's the empowering part. They need to be able to see those results for themselves. But yes, it very much depends on the culture in the organization and the kind of dynamics and politics that are involved as to how much of the other information you share. And that's a judgment call, basically, based on someone who has a good degree of care for the kind of long-term viability and health, if you like, of that part of the organization, needs to be a little bit careful about how that information is shared. So it's not a very helpful response, but it depends. We have to think through the results of sharing things in a particular way, because we might want to take some steps towards changing the culture inside that organization to make things more healthy.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's nothing more to add to that, really.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to wrap us up now. We'll make sure that we go through the rest of the questions so that everybody gets the answers that they need there. We're also going to be sending you an email with a replay of this call so that if you've missed anything or you think, oh, I'd like to hear that again, you can. And we're also going to be including the link as well for the Agile stationery bits that Benedict mentioned at the end of the session as well. So do keep an eye on your inbox for that. But I'd just love to say on behalf of everybody who came along today, Benedict, Matthew, thank you so much. It was such a great session. So thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who attended.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.